The invitation had sounded like a new beginning, a simple family dinner, a chance to repair old wounds. But by the time the night was over, I was left standing in my kitchen, staring at a photo on my phone, a photo of my son, Greg, sitting at a restaurant with everyone but me. I'd waited for them all night. The roast was perfect, the wine was chilled just right, and I was alone. It wasn't the first time he had failed me, but this felt like the last straw. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. But when the time came, my daughter-in-law's words on social media felt like a slap in the face. She probably forgot she invited us. And that was only the beginning. The roast was perfectly basted. The wine chilled to the degree Greg once claimed made it taste fancy. My tulips stood at full attention in their glass vase, bright and unnecessary. I'd lit the candles too early, and now they sagged, half melted in their silver holders. I stared at the door. Nothing. Maybe traffic. Maybe Greg forgot. Maybe Linda had one of her migraines. I gave them the benefit of the doubt, until my phone lit up. A photo, Linda's face beaming through the screen, so grateful to spend the evening with real family, blessed chosen family. My stomach dropped. They were at a restaurant downtown, one of those trendy ones with exposed brick and $30 salads. Linda's sister was in the picture, some friend too, and there was Greg barely visible in the corner, hunched like he'd rather be anywhere else. So this wasn't a scheduling error. It was a message. I stood there in my silent dining room, surrounded by place settings that had once meant something. The house smelled like rosemary and lemon. It should have smelled like home. Instead, it felt like a performance I was the only one left acting in. I carried the tulips back to the sink. They rustled softly, like they didn't want to go. Greg used to call every Sunday, then once a month, then only when I reminded him. When did my boy slip away? Was it marriage? Was it her? Linda always smiled just enough. Her compliments came with a pause, like she was calculating whether I deserved them. She never told Greg not to see me. She didn't have to. She just built a world where I no longer fit. I sat at my desk in the den. The room still smelled faintly of Harold's cologne. Even after all these years, the old oak drawer groaned open. I pulled out the envelope. Estate planning too. The paper inside felt heavier than I remembered. Everything had seemed so straightforward when Harold and I first drafted it. Greg would get the house, the accounts, the memory, because of course he would. But now, I stared at the clause assigning him executor. My hand curled into a fist. I wasn't bitter. I was awake. Was I really just going to let my life, my legacy, be handed over to someone who saw me as an obligation? Or worse, someone whose wife didn't even see me at all? I looked up at the photo on the wall. Greg at 7, running along the lake shore with a towel like a cape. He used to think I could fly. Maybe I still could, just not the way he remembered. I picked up the phone, dialed David Morton, our family lawyer. His voicemail kicked in. David, it's Jillian. I need to revise some documents. Please call me soon. My fingers trembled slightly as I set the receiver down. Then came the doorbell. One sharp chime, a sound I hadn't expected, and yet somehow had been waiting for all night. I had always thought I'd leave something for my son, but the more I looked at the numbers, the more I realized he was never going to appreciate it. Not unless I forced him to. The doorbell's echo lingered long after the sound had stopped. I stood frozen in the hallway, part of me wishing I hadn't answered the call, part of me aching for anything that might disrupt the silence. When I opened the door, no one was there. Just a box, medium-sized, taped at the edges. My name written across the top in Greg's uneven scrawl. The same slanted letters from years of homemade cards and thank you notes scribbled in haste. Inside was a framed photo. Last Christmas. The three of us on the couch. Linda centered and posed. Greg leaning in slightly. I sat on the edge, as if I didn't belong to the middle anymore. I remembered that night too clearly. The sweater Linda gave me, 2 sizes too small, and that pointed joke about keeping fit. I forced a smile. She knew exactly what she was doing. I set the photo down, face down, and walked away. Morning came like a weight. I sat at my desk, surrounded by documents that once felt like protection. Insurance, retirement, Harold's watch inventory, the estate paper. Now, they felt like mistakes waiting to be signed. Greg's name appeared again and again. Executor, beneficiary, sole heir, the house, the lake property, our joint safety deposit box. Every decision Harold and I had made, every thread of trust we'd stitched into the future, all pointed to Greg, and suddenly that faith felt misplaced. He hadn't stood up for me. He hadn't even texted me after the dinner that never was. And Linda, she'd taken up all the air in his world. Not with cruelty, just with presence, strategic, unrelenting presence. I made myself tea, hoping to dull the ache behind my ribs. Staring out at the yard, I thought about the boy who used to build forts with sticks and pretend he was saving the kingdom. He used to say, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll always come back." Maybe that was the real loss. Not that Greg had changed, but that I'd held on too tightly to the version of him who never truly existed. I picked up the phone and called Carol, my last living peer, the only one who'd known me before I was Greg's mother. "I'm thinking of changing my will," I said. "I don't trust Linda, and I'm not sure I trust Greg either." Carol exhaled slowly. "That's a big decision, Jillian. I know. Don't make it out of hurt. Make it out of truth." I didn't respond, not because she was wrong, but because she was right. And I already knew it. After we hung up, I returned to my desk. The lake house clause. I circled it in red, then drew a line under Greg's name. If he hadn't stepped foot in that house in 5 years, what made me think he'd protect it when I was gone? I stared at Harold's pocket watch ticking softly on the shelf. "I'm not doing this out of spite," I whispered aloud. "I'm doing this so someone remembers I was here." Then the phone rang. I snatched it up, adrenaline surging. "Jillian? It's David Morton." "Yes," I said, voice tight. "I reviewed your estate file. We can make the changes. But I need to show you something. Something you may not be aware of." "What is it?" He hesitated. "It's about one of your accounts. Greg's name is still on it. And there have been withdrawals. Recently. Ones you didn't authorize." I sat up straight, heart pounding. "I think we need to talk. In person. That phone call from the lawyer? It was just the beginning." When I started asking around, I realized there were other ways to make my voice heard. Ways Linda could never have predicted. I hung up the phone with David. But my hand didn't leave the receiver. My heart was still racing. The thought of Greg, quietly dipping into my accounts I hadn't touched in years, made something primal rise in me. Not sadness. Not shock. Defiance. I stood and walked slowly through the house. Every photograph on the walls, every piece of furniture, every chipped dish in the cabinet, it all had my fingerprints on it. I had built this place with Harold, loved it, protected it, and now I would have to protect it from my own blood. By noon, I was back at David's office. His brow furrowed as he flipped through documents. "You can make changes," he said, "and you can attach conditions, stipulations about access to assets, timing, even conduct." I nodded. "I want Greg to prove he deserves anything. No more handouts. No more blind faith." He hesitated. "This may damage your relationship with him further." I met his eyes. "If there's still a relationship, it's already damaged." That night, I walked the perimeter of my property, flashlight in hand. The porch light buzzed overhead. I checked the back door, the shed, the garage keypad. Then I stood at the front door and stared at the lock. It hadn't been changed in over 20 years. I changed it the next morning. New code, new keys. No one but me and the locksmith knew. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: control. I moved through the house like it belonged to me again. Not a museum Greg and Linda wandered through when it suited them. I packed up the framed Christmas photo, shoved it in a box in the attic, and replaced it with a photo of Harold holding Greg on his shoulders at the lake. I called David back and gave him the final instructions. Make it so Greg doesn't get anything until he shows up, alone, sober, and answers some questions from me. He didn't argue. Later, I found myself standing in front of the mirror staring at a face I barely recognized. Stronger, less apologetic. But guilt crept in anyway. Had I gone too far? Was I punishing my son for falling in love with someone who simply didn't love me back? I needed a voice that wasn't my own. So I called Edith, a retired teacher I used to volunteer with. Someone who'd never had children of her own, but understood loss. She listened carefully, then said, "You're not wrong to want respect, Jillian. Just don't forget he's still your boy, even if he's acting like a stranger. Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. The doorbell rang. Again. Only this time when I opened the door, Linda was standing there alone. Her smile was polished. Her eyes weren't. Jillian, she said sweetly. I thought we should talk. Just the two of. My stomach twisted. Her tone was syrup, but her posture was steel. Something was off. And whatever she was here to say, it wasn't what she rehearsed in the car. When Linda showed up at my door, I almost didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her apology was laced with so much sugar I could almost taste the poison. I stepped aside without a word. Let her in. It wasn't fear or politeness. It was curiosity. Let the spider spin her web. I'd watch from the center this time. Linda floated into the foyer like she owned it. Her perfume followed her, sharp and chemical like roses sprayed with bleach. She wore cream-colored slacks and a soft pink sweater. Innocent colors. It was always her thing. Look sweet. Talk sweet. Sting when no one's looking. I just wanted to clear the air, she said, placing her purse carefully on the console table like she'd been here 100 times. I nodded. Go on. Her lips curled into that practiced half smile. That dinner post. I should have been more thoughtful. It wasn't meant as we just got caught up in the moment. I raised an eyebrow. A moment filled with real family hashtags. A flicker. She didn't expect me to push back. Well, she said, brushing imaginary lint from her cuff. We all say things we don't mean when we're emotional. Greg's been under a lot of pressure lately. You know how he worries. Especially about you. She held the pause too long. About me. Yes, she said gently. He just wants you to be well. Happy, stable. There it was. Wrapped in silk. Dipped in arsenic. The word she didn't say, but danced around. Stable. We moved into the kitchen. She didn't wait to be invited. I poured tea. She didn't touch hers. You know, she said as she traced her fingertip around the rim of the mug. It's not easy for Greg. Balancing his work. Their expectations. I nearly laughed. Instead, I took a sip. Linda leaned back, crossed her legs and tilted her head. He's told me how grateful he is to have me help manage things. You know, the house. The accounts. Future planning. My jaw He says you've always been so independent. But at some point, everyone needs help. I leaned in. I'm not there yet. She smiled tightly. Of course not. But she didn't mean it. The room felt colder now. Despite the sunlight pouring in, a tension throbbed between us. Two women in a standoff, pretending to have tea. And then she said it. Greg would be devastated if something ever happened to you. She said softly, letting the words land like petals. Especially if things weren't organized. I didn't blink. Things are organized. Her gaze flicked to the corner of the counter. I imagined so. She stood. Well, I should go. I didn't mean to upset you. I just wanted to say, we're family. And families work things out. Her voice was honey. Her eyes were calculation. I followed her to the door, watched her walk away, with that same self-satisfied posture she wore the day she married my son. The door clicked shut. That's when I saw it. A folded letter on the counter. Not there before. Not mine. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. Legal stationery from a firm I didn't recognize. Greg's name. His signature. A petition for guardianship. He was moving to have me declared mentally unfit. Stripped of decision-making power. The will. The house. Everything was at risk. My own son was preparing to erase me while I was still alive. Linda hadn't come to make peace. She'd come to make sure I didn't see it coming. I never told anyone the real reason Greg and I stopped speaking for so long. Not even him. But that night when I sat in the quiet of my living room, it all came rushing back. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. The letter sat on the coffee table like a loaded weapon. Legal language twisted into something venomous. Plans to remove me from my own life. Guardianship. Mental incompetence. My name written like it belonged to someone else. A woman too frail to manage her own affairs. I stared at the fireplace for hours. The ashes were cold. The grate. Clean. Like it had never held fire. Like it never would again. I couldn't cry. I wanted to. Instead, I felt hollow. And somewhere under that. Furious. What had I done to make my son believe this was just or worse? Let Linda convince him it was. And then unbidden, unwelcome, it came to me. The night everything between Greg and me truly changed. It was 3 years after Harold passed. Greg came home from college, looking thin and tired. I asked questions too many. Probably. He said I didn't trust him. I said he was reckless. He accused me of meddling. We both said things that couldn't be unsaid. He left early the next morning without goodbye. We never really came back from that. And I never told him the truth that I wasn't trying to control him. I was trying to protect him from making the same mistakes Harold had made in his early years. The ones we spent years digging ourselves out of. But I wrapped that fear in silence. In distance. And Linda, she filled the space I left behind. Not with love. With strategy. I wondered, if I had been softer then, would any of this be happening now? The thought gutted me. I sat on the edge of the couch and pulled out the estate binder again. My notes. The red ink. The crossed-out names. It all looked childish now. Petty. I didn't know what the right decision was anymore. All I knew was that every choice came with a cost. Was I prepared to cut Linda out entirely? To risk Greg's rage? To be alone? I called David again. He picked up on the second ring. I got something. I said. From her lawyer. He didn't even need to ask who her was. Send it to me. He said. But be prepared. If they're escalating, you need to be clear about what you want. I want my son back. I said. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure that was true. Or possible. David sighed. Then you'll have to decide what matters more, peace or control. Because you probably won't get both. I hung up. And stared out the window. The sky was bruised with twilight. I hadn't moved in hours. Maybe this was the point of no return. That's when I heard the mail slot clatter. I walked slowly to the door. On the floor, in a crisp white envelope, was another letter. This one from Linda's attorney. The message was clear. Any changes to the will would be legally challenged. Preemptively. Ruthlessly. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were already fighting over what I hadn't even left yet. I wasn't going to let anyone dictate how my story ended. The time for apologies had passed. This was about me, not them. The envelope from Linda's lawyer sat on the counter, unopened now but seared into my mind. They were planning my burial while I was still breathing. And I'd had enough. The next morning, I pulled my hair back, put on Harold's old wool coat, and drove straight to David's office. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need to. He saw me through the glass and waved me in. Eyes wary. I sat down, calm but clear. No more hesitations, I said. Draft the new will. Attach every clause. Every safeguard. I want Greg to work for whatever he gets. David looked at me carefully. Are you sure? I've never been more sure. He nodded. I'll draw up the documents. But Jillian, once this is filed, there's no walking it back. You're declaring war. I met his gaze. No, I'm claiming peace. When I left, I didn't feel afraid. I felt sharp, awake. Back home, I called the bank and updated every access point, every beneficiary. I set up alerts, passwords, secondary verifications. Then I called a locksmith. Again, I wasn't just changing locks. I was changing access. No more skeleton keys handed out like heirlooms. That afternoon, I went through my phone and deleted names I'd kept out of habit. People who had once been neighbors, allies, friends, but who'd gone silent when things got complicated. I wasn't looking for comfort anymore. I was making room for truth. And truth came with sacrifice. Linda's texts arrived like clockwork that week. Hope you're well. Greg's worried about you. Let me know if you need help around the house. I didn't answer. She didn't deserve my silence, but she sure as hell didn't deserve my words either. On Friday, I walked into the backyard and sat on the swing Harold had installed for Greg when he was 5. The rope creaked, but it held. I rocked gently, breathing in the scent of old lilacs and dry leaves. I pictured the worst-case scenario. Greg never speaking to me again. Linda dragging my name through court. My will contested. My last years spent in solitude. And for the first time, it didn't undo me. Because I knew who I was, what I had built, what I was protecting. Greg had become a man I barely recognized. And maybe that wasn't just Linda's doing. Maybe part of it was my fear of losing him, and the compromises I made because of that fear. Well, I wasn't compromising anymore. I looked around the yard and realized something that startled me. I wasn't mourning. I was preparing. I went inside and made myself a sandwich, sat at the kitchen table with a quiet kind of certainty pulsing through me. Not joy, not victory, just clarity. The phone rang. I let it go to voicemail, then thought better of it and picked up. Mom? Greg's voice. Tight. Strained. Yes? I need to see you. I said nothing. Soon. Tonight. If you're free. There was something in his tone. Not the usual guilt-tinged obligation. This wasn't Linda's script. This was something else. Urgency. Or fear. I'll be home, I said. I hung up slowly, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was coming. Greg's voice on the other end of the phone felt like a tremor. What had he found out? The last thing I wanted was to face him, but I knew it was coming. He arrived just after dusk, headlights flooding the porch before going dark. I stayed seated on the sofa, heart steady, but breath shallow, until I heard his footsteps on the stone path. The knock was no hesitation, no warmth. I opened the door and found Greg standing there with that familiar guarded stance, hands in his jacket pockets, jaw set like concrete. He didn't say hello. Can I come in? I stepped back and motioned him through. He walked in like it wasn't his childhood home, more like a space he'd rented once, and didn't care to remember. We didn't sit. He stood by the fireplace, arms crossed. I stayed by the kitchen doorway, keeping something solid between us. I got a call from your lawyer, he started. I said nothing. You're changing the will. Yes. You didn't think that was worth a conversation. I tilted my head. I've been trying to have that conversation for a long time. You were too busy letting Linda speak for you. He flinched at that, but recovered quickly. So this is punishment? No, I said calmly. This is a correction. His eyes narrowed. You're cutting me out. I'm requiring you to show up, to prove you want more than just the assets. He stepped closer. You think I'm some leech, that I only care about what I inherit. There it was. The flare of hurt, of pride, of years of buried tension erupting like steam from a sealed pot. I think you let someone else decide what kind of son you should be, I said, and I'm tired of pretending I don't see it. Greg laughed, sharp and humorless. You've always needed control. Ever since Dad died, you've made everything about your terms. No, I snapped. Since your father died, I've been the one holding everything together, quietly, alone, while you let someone else pull you away from your own family. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing now, just like when he was young and overwhelmed. You act like I chose Linda over you. You did. You act like you were easy to love. That landed. Not because it was false, but because he believed it. My voice cracked, but I didn't falter. I wasn't perfect, Greg, but I loved you with everything I had, and you let her make me the villain. He stared at the floor. You always wanted me to be someone I'm not. I wanted you to be strong, responsible. I wanted you to be worthy of the man your father was trying to be. He looked up, eyes damp but furious. You're rewriting the story. That's what this will is. Your last shot at proving you were right all along. And you think letting her manage your life makes you right. We stood in silence, two strangers linked by blood and broken years. Finally he exhaled. You know what hurts the most. You never trusted me. Not really. And you never earned it. He stepped back like the words had slapped him. Then he straightened. You want a war over fine. Have it. You've already lost me, Mom. His voice was final, like the slam of a judge's gavel. This is just the final nail in the coffin. He turned, opened the door and left it wide behind him. And I didn't follow. After Greg left, the silence in the house was deafening. But I knew something bigger was coming. Something that would shake everything to its core. He didn't slam the door. That would have at least left a sound to hold on to. Instead, he left it open, like an echo waiting to swallow the house whole. I shut it slowly, locked it out of reflex, then leaned against it staring at the grain of the wood. My breath came in shallow waves. I wanted to cry, but the tears had dried up somewhere around the second betrayal. The clock ticked in the corner. The heater hit. The wind nudged a branch against the kitchen window. I sat on the edge of the couch and waited for my heartbeat to settle. It didn't. That night, I didn't sleep. Again. The bedroom felt like a museum. Greg's room, down the hall, was still full of ghosts. I stayed in the living room, blanket over my shoulders, staring out at the black trees swaying under the moonlight. Then the phone rang. It was almost midnight. No ID. I let it go, but whoever it was called again and again. The next morning, a letter slid through the mail slot. No return address, just my name. Inside, a typed note. You think you've won, but you've made enemies. Be careful what you try to protect. My hand trembled. It wasn't just legal now. It was personal, violent in its subtlety. I called David's office, asked to speak with him directly. The assistant hesitated, then told me he'd stepped away. Again. That was the third time in 5 days. Something curdled in my gut. A few hours later, I got a voicemail from David, short, clipped, and strange. Jillian, please don't panic. We need to meet. There are complications with the filings. Complications. That word sat like a stone in my chest. I drove to his office the next morning, but he was unavailable. His receptionist avoided my eyes. I sat in the parking lot, trying to piece together what my instincts already knew. That evening, I dug through the paperwork he'd sent weeks ago. I checked email headers, fine print, everything. And there, in a routine document CC line, I saw an address I didn't recognize. A quick search told me what I feared. It belonged to Linda's lawyer. He hadn't just been careless, he'd been compromised. Every clause I'd revised, every condition I'd added, every word of fear I'd whispered in confidence, she had it all. I dropped the papers to the floor, heart pounding. My stomach turned. I felt sick with betrayal, not just from Greg or Linda, but from the one person I thought I could still rely on professionally. David hadn't just failed me, he'd sold me. That's when the mail slot clicked again. Another envelope. This one stamped and sealed, formal, from Linda's attorney. I opened it slowly, hands shaking. It wasn't a threat this time. It was a declaration. They were initiating legal action, contesting the will, pursuing guardianship, and if necessary, requesting emergency authority to freeze my accounts. They weren't coming for my estate anymore. They were coming for me. I didn't know who to trust anymore. The game had changed, and I was no longer in control, but that didn't mean I was going down without a fight. The letter from Linda's attorney still sat on the table unopened again, even though I'd read it 3 times. I wanted to tear it in half, burn it, mail it back with a smear of red lipstick and a middle finger, but I didn't. I left it there, proof of war. I stood by the window, fingers tapping the glass, watching the mail carrier pull away. It had become a ritual, expecting bad news every time the flap squeaked open. They weren't waiting anymore. They were advancing. Linda, with her polished cruelty, Greg, with his silence, and David, my supposed ally, had handed them the ammunition. The betrayal ran deeper than I thought. The more I traced the paper trail, the clearer it became. This wasn't spur of the moment. It had been a long, deliberate strategy, months, maybe a year in the making. Every revision I'd whispered to David, every clause about Greg proving himself, it was never protected. They'd been building a case against me from inside my own defense. I felt like I was losing altitude in slow motion. No crash, just a steady, helpless fall. I reached out to Susan Langley, an old friend from Harold's business days, sharp as a tack, wickedly discreet. She'd moved into estate litigation, after retirement, more for entertainment than necessity. I need help, I said. Someone on the inside betrayed me. She listened carefully. I'll look into it, she said. But understand this, if they've gotten that far, you can't play fair anymore. That word stuck. Fair. I'd been trying to keep some dignity in this, hoping reason or decency would prevail. But those rules didn't apply anymore. Not with Linda. A week passed, slow and punishing. I barely slept. I made lists, wrote out timelines, searched emails, reread old text threads like they were crime scenes. Patterns emerged, phone numbers I didn't recognize, transactions I didn't remember approving. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a bunker. I kept the curtains drawn. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I logged every interaction. And still it wasn't enough. Then Susan called back. I did some digging. She said, Linda's lawyer, he's been using someone to funnel updates. Not just your lawyer, a financial contact too. Someone in the firm that handles your pension. My stomach turned. This isn't just about the will anymore, Jillian. It's about power of attorney. They want control over everything. My knees gave slightly. I sat, gripping the edge of the chair. They're building a portrait of incompetence, she continued. Late payments, missed appointments, confusion, tiny things, things people dismiss. But when collected, they're lethal. It wasn't just a legal battle, it was character assassination by 1,000 cuts. I hung up and stared at the blank wall for a long time. My reflection in the mirror across the room looked pale, defeated. But I wasn't done. I gathered every document, every timeline, every screenshot. I called the note. I left voicemails with 2 separate attorneys. Ones Linda didn't know existed. If I was going down, it wouldn't be quietly. And then late that afternoon, the phone rang again. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A pause, then a voice I didn't expect. Mrs. Dwyer, you don't know me, but I work at Linda's firm. I've seen what they're doing, and I can't stay quiet anymore. My breath caught. What do you mean? A beat of silence. I have files, correspondence, proof, but we need to meet. Off the record. The line went dead, and just like that the game had shifted again. I didn't know who to trust anymore. The game had changed, and I was no longer in control. But that didn't mean I was going down without a fight. The letter from Linda's attorney still sat on the table, unopened again, even though I'd read it 3 times. I wanted to tear it in half, burn it, mail it back with a smear of red lipstick and a middle finger. But I didn't. I left it there. Proof of war. I stood by the window, fingers tapping the glass, watching the mail carrier pull away. It had become a ritual, expecting bad news every time the flap squeaked open. They weren't waiting anymore. They were advancing. Linda, with her polished cruelty, Greg with his silence, and David, my supposed ally, had handed them the ammunition. The betrayal ran deeper than I thought. The more I traced the paper trail, the clearer it became. This wasn't spur of the moment. It had been a long, deliberate strategy. Months, maybe a year in the make. Every revision I'd whispered to David. Every clause about Greg proving himself. It was never protected. They'd been building a case against me from inside my own defense. I felt like I was losing altitude in slow motion. No crash, just a steady, helpless fall. I reached out to Susan Langley, an old friend from Harold's business days, sharp as a tack, wickedly discreet. She'd moved into estate litigation after retirement, more for entertainment than necessity. I need help, I said. Someone on the inside betrayed me. She listened carefully. I'll look into it, she said. But understand this, if they've gotten that far, you can't play fair anymore. That word stuck, fair. I'd been trying to keep some dignity in this, hoping reason or decency would prevail. But those rules didn't apply anymore. Not with Linda. A week passed, slow and punishing. I barely slept. I made lists, wrote out timelines, searched emails, reread old text threads like they were crime scenes. Patterns emerged. Phone numbers I didn't recognize. Transactions I didn't remember approving. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a bunker. I kept the curtains drawn. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I logged every interaction. And still it wasn't enough. Then Susan called back. I did some digging, she said. Linda's lawyer. He's been using someone to funnel updates. Not just your lawyer. A financial contact too. Someone in the firm that handles your pension. My stomach turned. This isn't just about the will anymore, Jillian. It's about power of attorney. They want control over everything. My knees gave slightly. I sat, gripping the edge of the chair. They're building a portrait of incompetence, she continued. Late payments, missed appointments, confusion, tiny things, things people dismiss. But when collected, they're lethal. It wasn't just a legal battle, it was character assassination by 1,000 cuts. I hung up and stared at the blank wall for a long time. My reflection in the mirror across the room looked pale, defeated, but I wasn't done. I gathered every document, every timeline, every screenshot. I called the note. I left voicemails with 2 separate attorneys. Ones Linda didn't know existed. If I was going down, it wouldn't be quietly. And then, late that afternoon, the phone rang again. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A pause, then a voice I didn't expect. Mrs. Dwyer, you don't know me, but I work at Linda's firm. I've seen what they're doing, and I can't stay quiet anymore. My breath caught. What do you mean? A beat of silence. I have files, correspondence, proof. But we need to meet. Off the record. The line went dead. And just like that, the game had shifted again. The chess game was far from over. Each move I made seemed to push Linda further into a corner. But I knew better than to celebrate just yet. The next move could be my last. I stood on the porch long after Greg hung up. The air was cool, but my skin felt hot, like I was caught between fever and frost. She was suing him now, her own husband, the same man she'd once coaxed into betraying his mother. I should have felt vindicated. I didn't. I felt hollow. There was no clean win in this game, only survival. I went inside and locked the door. Then I turned on the lamp in the living room and sat at Harold's old desk. I pulled out the envelope, labeled Final Strategy, the one Susan and I had drafted last week, just in case things got worse. They had. I flipped through the paperwork. Everything was ready. Emergency contingencies, backup beneficiaries, escrow protections, legal counters. All I had to do was sign one more document, and Linda's influence would evaporate like steam. She wouldn't get a cent. Not from me, not through Greg, but my hand hovered over the pen. I realized what this final move meant, not just the end of her reach, but the end of whatever thread still tethered Greg to me. Would he forgive me if I cut her off completely? Or would he see it as another power play, another reason to believe his mother only ever saw love as leverage? I set the pen down. That night, I couldn't sleep. Again, my mind raced through every memory. Greg's first scraped knee, his first heartbreak, the last time he hugged me like he meant it. I thought about the sound of his laughter when he was 12, how free it was, how distant it felt now. But there was no turning back. Linda had weaponized every part of him, his fears, his weaknesses, his loyalties, and I'd let her for too long. In the morning, I walked to the park just down the street. I needed air, distance. That's when I saw her, Maggie. She was Harold's former assistant, retired early after a messy divorce. The kind of woman who remembered birthdays and hated small talk. She waved me over. Word travels, she said, handing me a coffee. I gave a half smile. I bet. She leaned in. I know Linda. Or rather, I knew her mother. I looked up. She was the same way, Maggie said. Smiles in public, ice in private, manipulated her husband until he snapped. That woman left scars. I hadn't asked for this intel, but something about it felt like a key. Linda hadn't come out of nowhere. She was forged, molded, practiced. Maggie reached into her purse and handed me a worn photo. Linda's mother, a newspaper clipping, something about a restraining order, financial coercion. She's not as untouchable as she pretends to be, Maggie said. You just have to aim at the... I went home with a fire in my chest. I opened the drawer and picked up the phone. Then it rang before I could dial. Susan. Her voice was brisk, breathless. We have something, she said. A deposition from Linda's past, sealed until now. Someone's ready to talk. Someone who knows what she did before she met Greg. My pulse thundered. What did she do? I'll send you everything, she said. But brace yourself. This could change everything. I stared at the silent phone after she hung up. The next move wasn't mine anymore. It was his. The truth had finally come to light, and with it, everything I thought I knew about my family had been shattered. I was no longer fighting for money. I was fighting for my own survival. Susan's email pinged mid-morning. A single sentence. Deposition transcript attached. Read. I opened the PDF with trembling hands. Pages and pages of Linda's own testimony. Years before Greg ever met her. Family court records. A scandal involving fraud, coercion and betrayal. Her mother's name surfaced. Money missing. Forged signatures. Emotional manipulation. Linda had inherited more than a name. My vision blurred. I leaned my forehead against the screen. This wasn't just about my life anymore. Linda had weaponized history, built her power on broken promises and hidden lies. I closed the files and breathed. In and out. Slow. There had to be a decision now. Reveal this secret, and expose her for the predator she was. Or hold it close and let Susan's legal team use it when the time was right. My eyes drifted to the list of clauses still unsigned, the ones that would finalize Linda's exclusion. This was the crossroad. If I acted too quickly, I risked everything. Lawsuits, defamation counters, public humiliation. If I waited too long, Linda would solidify her position, maybe even win court-sanctioned access to my assets. I paced the living room in circles, trying to still the storm in my mind. Memories floated by. Greg's childhood laughter, Harold's gentle hands. The evening board games turned bitter after Linda stepped into our world. I stopped at the window. Outside, the yard was quiet, the swing hanging still. A deep breath gathered in my chest. I signed. Not just the final page that made Linda powerless at the point of my death. The rest I saved. This was my line in the sand. Then I drafted a carefully worded email to Susan. Use deposition as leverage. If negotiations, then now. If not, leak to press at strategy meeting. It felt like war correspondence. Afternoon came with cold clarity. I felt as if I'd shed a skin brittle, worn, now sloughed off. That evening, I sat by the fire, the signed papers in my lap, waiting for something to break. My phone rang. Just a name I hadn't heard in months. Linda. My pulse doubled. My finger hovered. Jillian. Her voice smooth as satin. I'd like to speak. A truce. I know things have gone too far. I held the breath she stole away. I remembered the first time I'd met her. Sweet, charming, polite, before the edges showed. A truce, I said. After everything. Yes, she replied. Before it gets worse. For both of us. I closed my eyes. The deposition. The new documents. The battle line I'd drawn. She was offering peace now on her terms. A part of me wanted to believe her. Another part, the right part, told me she was waiting. For now, she said. Let's be reasonable. The line clicked. The decision was out there now. I pressed my hand against my heart. A weight lifted. A dread swung into place. I realized I no longer cared whether Linda would lie next. What mattered was that I had survived her, that I had reclaimed something no one could take. Linda had called, offering a truce, but I knew, down to my bones, that hers never came without a price. I had only one option left, and it wasn't going to be easy. But in the end, there could only be one victor. Morning light filtered through the curtain. I sat at the kitchen table with the signed documents in front of me, but my mind was already several moves ahead, like one of Harold's chess games he used to teach me. I knew Linda would push back. Her attorney's letter made that clear. But the new deposition gave me leverage. What I didn't expect was the call from Greg. He wanted to talk. I told Susan. She advised caution. But something in my chest told me this talk was inevitable. He came to the house unannounced. I saw the car before he knocked. Black, sleek, foreign license plate. He stood in the doorway silent. I let him in. No games, he said quietly. None, I replied. He followed me to the study, where the depositions were already printed and waiting. He closed the door behind him. This was the moment everything changed again. He looked at the flash drive, then back to me. That evidence. It made me realize certain things. I didn't invite him to continue. He flushed, then said, Linda didn't force me. Not really. I stayed. I played along. My heart tightened. He leaned forward. I knew about her mother, about manipulation, but I was loyal to the woman I thought I loved. I fought for calm. What are you saying? He exhaled. I'm saying I orchestrated things. I let things spiral because I wanted control too. My breath caught. He continued. I planned to take everything. Your house, Linda's inheritance. Even control over the lake property. I built this drama to weaken both of you. So, I could be the survivor. I stared. You're lying, I finally said. That's impossible. He looked me in the eye. It's real. And I'm sorry. Not because I regret it, but because you're smarter than I thought. I felt a wave of nausea. You think I only served as Linda's puppet, he whispered. But I was the puppet master. He paid every betrayal, every will change, every secret I kept. It was all part of a plan. My world tilted. Why? I croaked. He paused. Because when Harold died, there wasn't room for me and Linda. She promised me I'd have it all. But I realized later she wouldn't share. So I turned the table. The study felt smaller. My hands shook. You betrayed us both. He nodded. You thought you could win by breaking us. I stood. There's no victory in this. Only ruin. He lifted the flash drive I'd given him earlier. I kept If I want, I can destroy you. Anger surged like fire. You won't. He smiled thinly. Watch me. Silence stretched. I swallowed, pointing at the pile of documents. Everything you built. Everything she built. It ends now. He raised an eyebrow. I've already sent the deposition to press, to courts, to Susan, and I signed the final clause. All that remains is my signature on one more page, which I will never give you. He stepped back, eyes flicking to the signed stack. So we're done. Game over. I said. He nodded, a crooked acceptance. Then he reached into his jacket. I tensed. He pulled out a keychain with several keys, my house key among them. My backup copy, he said. Judgment's been entered. The property defaulted to me. I stood frozen. He placed the keys on the desk, turned and walked slowly toward the door. You might think you've won, he said quietly, but I'll leave you with empty walls and silence. That's not peace. It's exactly what you wanted. He paused at the threshold. Enjoy your victory, Jillian. It's hollow. Then he left, slamming the door behind him, and I realized the prize I'd fought for may already have slipped through my fingers. The game had come to its ultimate conclusion, but nothing prepared me for the last betrayal. Linda glided into the living room as if it were a stage. No knock, no hesitation, just her and Greg trailing behind, tense and silent. The glow of afternoon light fell on her pale outfit, immaculate as ever. I stood behind the poker-faced stack of papers I'd assembled, every deposition transcript, every email, every redacted note. It was all there, on the table between us. Sit, I said. All three of us remained standing. I motioned again. No one moved. It's your legacy, I told Linda, nodding at the papers. Everything you built on, every manipulation. She didn't blink. She picked up the flash drive, deliberately, plugged it into the laptop I'd placed on the edge of the table. Clara shadows flickered across her face as she scrolled through the transcripts. She looked up slowly. So that's your final act. Expose me publicly. It's what it always was, I replied. Not about winning. It's about exposing the truth. Greg's voice cut through. Why bring her here, Mom? Why not just release the files and leave it at that? The house, the lake property, your father's legacy. They're all here, I said, placing a gentle hand on the stack. This isn't just strategy. This is protection. Linda closed the laptop with a soft click. You handed her the weapon, Greg. You handed her your weakness. He snapped back. I didn't. It's her fight, not mine. I stepped between brooding mother and outraged son. She saved herself, Greg. Linda's lips curved. You think you changed things. I let it unravel for a reason. I didn't want control. I wanted one thing. She met my gaze. A jagged smile appeared. I wanted you both to fall apart so I could be the survivor in the wreckage. Shock struck me. This was bigger than I thought. Deeper betrayal. Greg stood rigid. His voice tremored. You used me too. She sighed. You were useful, but the chaos was always the goal. Suddenly Greg lunged, anger flaring hot, raw. You're sick. My hand shot out. Stop. He froze. Turning to Linda, I spoke softly. This ends now. Her face didn't soften. So we declare victory? She asked, venom thin. You think you've turned the table? I looked at Greg. Confusion and pain flickered through his eyes. He slid to his knees, picked up the old key I once gave him, held it in his hand a moment, then placed it in mine. You win, he choked. But maybe, at what cost? Tears burned behind my eyelid. I watched Linda back away. Her final words, you'll regret this. It's never over. Greg stepped in front of the closed door before she could leave. That woman taught me I wasn't enough, he said, that my worth was in drama and allegiance, not in being your son. His voice cracked. I lost the son you raised, and I took away the man who once trusted you. I swallowed, voice fractured. Greg, I did everything to protect you. He shook his head, the weight of loss in his eyes. You preserved. I was collateral. Silence pressed in like the walls closing. Linda clicked the door shut. Behind it, finality echoed. He turned to me, softer. You did what you thought was right. Maybe I still hate you, but you're still my mother. My breath caught, a hollow ache in my chest. I'd won the battle, but realizing the cost, I held the documents of victory, but my victory felt empty, because the son I loved might never return. It was over, or perhaps it had only just begun. Either way, I'd won the freedom to live life on my own. The silence after they left wasn't empty. It was full of everything I'd fought through, everything I'd let go of, everything I would never get back. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the door. The keys Greg had returned sat on the table, still warm from his hand. A relic, a goodbye, maybe both. I didn't cry. I went to the kitchen and made tea. The kettle sang like it used to when Harold was alive, and I let it keep singing a little longer before I turned it off. Outside, the wind stirred the lilacs. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower buzzed. Life indifferent and ongoing. I took my mug out to the backyard. The swing still hung from the old maple. I sat in it, letting it creak under my weight, and looked up at the sky through the web of branches. I had lost. I had won. Both. Maybe I had no illusions that Greg and I would find easy repair. Maybe we wouldn't repair at all. Maybe our story had ended, quietly, painfully, in that living room. But Linda was gone, her claws pulled from my life, her voice muted, her reach severed. That was something. That was enough. And for the first time I realized the quiet wasn't punishment, it was peace. Later that evening, I took the old cedar chest out of storage. I laid the documents in it carefully. Wills, letters, deeds, the stack of files Susan had assembled. I closed the lid and locked it. Then I took the key, walked down the back path to the edge of the lake and tossed it in, let someone else fish it out when I was gone. The next morning, I called the local college. I signed the forms to set up a scholarship in Harold's name, something for students who'd lost a parent, something clean, something forward. No more inheritance wars, no more fear about who would get what. Let the legacy be what we built, not what we hoarded. Susan called that afternoon. Are you sure about all this? I am, I said. It's time. She paused. You sound light. I am, I said again. And I was. That night, I sat by the fire, just me and the old house breathing around me. I didn't feel like a woman left behind. I felt like a woman who had finally arrived. When I closed my eyes, I didn't dream of Greg's childhood. I didn't dream of courtrooms or wills or Linda's smirk. I dreamt of open roads, of fresh air, of beginning again. And when I woke, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like mine, entirely mine. Tomorrow, I'd plant something new in the garden, tomatoes maybe, or hydrangea, something stubborn and lovely. Tomorrow, I'd